It's so easy to fall into a place of needing to do everything perfectly when you're trying to conceive. You want to eat right, you want to look after your body, but ultimately you'll do whatever you can to fall pregnant. That line between healthy and obsessive is a fine one. And if you're anything like me, you end up becoming restrictive to the point where life just isn't enjoyable anymore. On today's episode, I chat with Emily Barker, who is a registered nutritionist, and she's going to break down exactly how to approach nutrition for fertility without it taking over your life. Welcome to your journey to fertility. This is the podcast that blends both science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Here each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so you can stop stressing that you'll never have a baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for spending time here with me today. And on this episode, we are diving into a topic that comes up a lot in the fertility space, and that is nutrition for fertility. Now, obviously, I'm not a nutritionist, but I work with several amazing practitioners who provide advice to my students where needed. But nutrition is one of those things I find that can quickly tip from feeling really empowering, like you're in control of something and you're doing something that's really helpful for your body, to quickly becoming very obsessive. And I remember when I was in the depths of struggling to conceive and going through IVF, I was so obsessive about what I would eat that to the point that I did crazy things. I would take my own gluten-free soy sauce out to sushi restaurants with me because I didn't want to have the soy that was available there because it had gluten in it, even though I wasn't gluten intolerant. And I would refuse to go out to restaurants with friends that I didn't know the menu of just because I was worried that I'd have to eat things like dairy and sugar and, excess carbohydrates and just all of these things that I deemed not good enough for my body when I was trying to conceive. So how do you find that balance and get to the point of helping yourself without making your life miserable? Well, Emily is going to explain how you figure that out and to reassure you that, no, you don't have to do everything perfectly in order to fall pregnant. Emily is a registered clinical nutritionist and a fertility expert. She's passionate about supporting and empowering couples on the really complex and bumpy path to parenthood. She's helped countless couples achieve their dream of becoming parents in her clinic using a powerful formula that brings together her extensive training in nutritional science, functional medicine, and her specialist work in fertility support, and as well as her own experiences in holistic wellness as well. And she really gets to the bottom of these different issues and guides clients to get their bodies and minds in the best possible place to conceive. Her power is being able to take complex science and a heavy subject matter and make it accessible, really approachable, and ultimately enriching. She believes in the power of nature, the power of the female body, and that everything you need to heal is already within you. What I love about Emily's work is her emphasis on what to include in your life rather than restrict or take away from it. And she predominantly works with couples, not just women, because as we know, men are just as important in this equation. So I know you're going to get a lot out of this conversation. Let's get started. Here's Emily. Emily, welcome to the podcast. I feel like I know you, and I've never met you because we live how many thousands of miles away from each other. But I love the work that you do, and everything that we've done together has just been really inspiring and really helpful for so many people. So thank you for being here. Can we start by learning a little bit about you and the work that you do?
Oh, thank you for that lovely intro. And yeah, it's great to be here. And yeah, I feel the same about you. I think the work we do is quite aligned in lots of ways. So yeah, really, really excited to be here today. So yeah, so I am a registered nutritionist. I kind of started off working in kind of women's health and hormones. And then I was finding that a kind of disproportionate number of my clients were coming to see me, were kind of looking for support with fertility. I was kind of in my mid-30s at the time. A lot of my friends were struggling. And so, yeah, I started kind of leaning into that and kind of supporting, clients in with fertility. And I guess just seeing how powerful that was and kind of getting those results just, was really beautiful. And I was like, you know what, this is something that, I want to specialize in. And then I kind of started working with couples because I realized, just working with a female partner, that's just 50% of what's going on. And so I started working with couples, which I loved that dynamic as well. And then, just kind of did further training, kind of really getting under the skin of all things fertility, working with urologists and embryologists and kind of just really getting that in-depth training to kind of really, support my clients. And yeah, so that's kind of what I've been building ever since, just supporting couples to really, get to the bottom of what's might be driving issues and just kind of really help them to do everything they can to give themselves the best chances, really.
It's so good you mentioned that because it is so much a 50-50 equation. And I think maybe less than 1% of the people that listen to this podcast would be men. But
Yeah.
it is such a female driven thing, isn't it? And I think that is slowly changing, but definitely not quickly enough. So we are definitely going to talk about men today. But this conversation is going to be based around this idea of not having to be perfect at every moment of your day while you're trying to conceive in order to conceive, because we know people all around us every day of our lives fall pregnant when they haven't been doing everything perfectly. And it's very easy to fall down that rabbit hole. So I'm excited to unravel a little bit from your perspective, someone who must see people that want to do everything perfectly all the time, how we can start to unwind a little bit of that. And I'd love to start by talking about this slight disconnect between what you do and what, say, the Western medical world or Western medical professionals do, where, you go to a fertility clinic. And I remember when I first started going through treatments, the approach was, well, what do we have to do to you in order to get you pregnant? As opposed to, well, maybe let's have a look at what's going on within your body to figure out why you might not be getting pregnant in the first place. And when I started working with a holistic practitioner, it was such a breath of fresh air to be kind of asked questions that I hadn't been asked before and just to be looking at it from another perspective and to put your body first, as opposed to let's just get you pregnant as quickly as possible. It doesn't matter what we have to do. We'll just put you through it. So can you talk a bit about why you think that approach is beneficial?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you're so right. I have so many clients that, they get their referral for IVF and or for their fertility referral and they assume that that clinic or that doctor is going to, ask questions and figure out why they're not getting pregnant. When in reality, in the kind of Western medicine world, when someone's been struggling for a year, whether tests are normal or tests are not normal, the tools that they have to give you are the same. It's if you're ovulating, it's IVF, the next available in your next cycle, kind of, no matter how old you are or, what kind of state your body is and all your stress levels, IVF is kind of what they have to offer. And, it's ASAP. And yeah, obviously IVF is incredible and it's amazing that we have this technology and it supports so many couples to get pregnant. But, what Western medicine isn't great at is that taking a step back and thinking, okay, well what's going on? Why isn't this couple getting pregnant? And I think, a lot of the time that's because they don't really have the tools to be able to support you with the answers to that. They have IVF or medication. Whereas from what I do, my perspective, and lots of more kind of holistic practitioners, that's kind of where our value is and our strength, I guess, because we're kind of filling those gaps and kind of, I guess, yeah, taking a step back and thinking, okay, well, what's going on beneath the surface? Why can't this couple get pregnant? And generally, when you've kind of gone through that medical process, the investigations that you've had are quite basic, really. Like bloods, hormones, scans, and that'll be it. Whereas actually, there's lots of things that you can look at and explore, I guess, before needing to go down that route. Or even if you are going down that route, actually some things IVF won't be, it's not a kind of cure-all. So there'll be some certain things that, IVF isn't going to kind of override. So either way, no matter if you want to kind of, get to the bottom of things and try naturally, or you are, going into IVF, I think taking that step back and just looking at, okay, what's my nourishment like? What's my diet like? What's my lifestyle like? Are there things that haven't been flagged up that might be getting in the way that we can look at? And that starts to feel a bit more empowering and a little bit more hopeful and holistic. And I think, we generally in couples of, a year in, they're exhausted. It's rubbish. Shit, isn't it? Like, it's hard. And then to just kind of go straight into IVF, feeling stressed, feeling down, and, not kind of giving them that, chance to kind of really get their body and mind in a really good place. I think is kind of doing them a bit of a disservice, really.
It is empowering, isn't it, when you learn this information? You go from being at the whim of these doctors that give you these stats and it's based on your age and it's all very scary, to suddenly you think, oh, actually, there is something I can do about this. And I remember very clearly when I started working with a naturopath that I took it way too far because there's a fine line, isn't there, between being empowered and all of a sudden you are cutting out everything. Like, you won't let yourself have any alcohol, you don't drink coffee, you don't have sugar, or what else was I cutting out? Gluten. And, I'm not gluten intolerant. I was stressing out if I was faced with a piece of cheese. I mean, at what stage do you think it goes from empowering to obsessive and unhelpful?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely a balance. And I mean, I don't know, but it probably can go that way whilst working with someone. But I think, what tends to happen is when somebody doesn't necessarily have an understanding of what they really should be doing, what's kind of going to be optimal for them. And, they don't really have that baseline. And so they're just kind of reading lots of things on the internet, restricting lots of things. And they guess they're kind of, they can't really move for kind of information. And I think that's when it kind of tends to dip into that, okay, I'm just going to restrict everything because I don't know what's good and I don't know what's bad. I'm just going to stay on this really fine line of cutting out alcohol, cutting out everything, and just, that's what I'm going to do. And I think, when you don't have that understanding or baseline or kind of education of, okay, this is what I need to be doing most of the time, then that's when I think it can tip into that. I think when you do have that, okay, I feel empowered with this is generally what I should be doing. And then I can have that flexibility for the rest of the time. And you can kind of feel a bit more confident in that. But I think when you don't have that confidence, or you don't have that, understanding, I think it can definitely tip into that very restrictive kind of phase. And I think, I generally find my clients kind of fall into two kind of, it's not a kind of black and white, but, some people that find it very hard to kind of stay on track and that, and commit to making change. And they're just like, oh, do you know what, whatever, I'm just going to, eat what I want and, binge or whatever that is. Or people that have gone completely the other way around and are so restrictive, are not, having coffee, not having alcohol, not having anything joyful. And, there is a lot in between, but I think, I do see those two extremes, I think. And it's about kind of coming into a middle ground, a bit more of a nuanced place rather than that kind of real black and white where, I think it can be an easy place to go when you're scared and, fearful of the future. I think that's, when we tend to kind of grasp onto black and white, right or wrong.
Yes, because we want to control things and it's so out of our control when you're going through infertility. What do you think would be a good benchmark or some basics that I don't like this word should, but we would consider including within our nutrition without getting obsessive? What are the main things we should focus on?
Yeah, so I think, Obviously, well, when I work with clients, it does kind of get personalized, but I think kind of just generally, when you are trying to conceive, looking at a kind of a bit of a Mediterranean diet with a few kind of tweaks, I guess. So, we're wanting to focus on whole foods as much as possible. So, avoiding the kind of more processed foods, looking at, ideally, I would say good quality meat. So including that in your fertility diet. So kind of grass-fed beef, free-range white meat, oily fish, shellfish. So it's all of those kind of really nutrient-dense foods that I think, again, people get a bit confused and think, okay, no, I shouldn't be eating meat, I shouldn't be eating this. But actually those kind of animal products, if you're not eating them, if you're not avoiding them for kind of ethical reasons or whatever that is, they are really good for kind of nourishing your body, and they're such high in nutrients. So yeah, good quality animal products, good quality dairy. If you've not any issues with dairy, if you're not feeling like you've got digestive issues, then you shouldn't be avoiding dairy, because it's really nutrient dense, and it's there's lots of good research on full fat dairy supporting fertility and kind of ovulation and things like that. And then just really looking at that kind of rainbow fruit and veg. So those kind of antioxidant rich foods, which, support egg health, and the colour of plants basically come from the antioxidant. So we want to get a big kind of tag team of them. So when we're eating lots of different colours, we're getting a real mix of those antioxidants. So, that's a really kind of simple, visual way just to be like, okay, how many colours am I getting on my plate? And, that's, you're halfway there, if you're kind of eating in that way. And making sure you're getting, I'm sure, every reel on the internet, and maybe it's just because of the reels I'm following, but, I think every women's health influencer is kind of pushing the importance of protein, which is great, because protein, again, is really important. And, it's definitely one I see in people's food diaries that they're not getting enough of. So all your meals, making sure, you're having a decent amount of protein with all of your meals. The carbs, ideally complex, but, having white rice, white pasta, that is fine to have as well when you're pairing it with protein and fat. And yeah, so that's just, I guess, a real good baseline of working out kind of, what you should be including. So fat, protein, carbs, lots of colourful fruit and vegetables, nuts and seeds. And that's, I guess, your baseline, which I would say, 80% of the time to be doing that.
Amazing.
And then the other 20%, is where the flexibility comes in.
Which is good to have, because if you know that you have to be perfect 100% of the time, you're going to be devastated with yourself when you have that dessert that's full of sugar, or, like you said, something that's joyful. We don't get enough joy in our lives when we are struggling with fertility, and that's so important.
Yeah. So I think, for my clients that kind of are very much, find it very hard to kind of lean into that flexibility, I think a really nice way of kind of framing it, or kind of with, food, or with any kind of, I guess, decision that you're kind of making, and, in terms of your self-care or your nourishment, I guess, is, not really asking, is this right? Is this wrong? Is this healthy? Is this not healthy? But actually asking, is this loving? How loving is this choice that I'm making? Because I think that it frees you up a bit more, because, if you think, a piece of chocolate cake, that can be loving or it can be not loving. It's the, I guess it's the intention, if you're sitting down and having a coffee and a cake with your friend, you're enjoying it, that is a loving choice to make. And it's important to have that as part of our diet, and have that flexibility. But yeah, that same piece of chocolate cake, if it's the third one you're having and you're just beating yourself up and feeling like, rubbish, then that's the kind of becomes unloving. So it's, I guess, getting away from the cake itself, because that's not right or wrong. It's a piece of cake, but your intention of where you're coming from, I think that's an important distinction to make, I guess.
That is a beautiful way of looking at it. And I love the idea of what you spoke about more broadly, about what to include within your life as opposed to what to restrict and what to stay away from. It's not about let's cut everything out. It's what can we include 80% of the time to make us feel good. Can we talk about testing? Because I think that testing is another one of those things where we can fall down the rabbit hole with. And I had every functional test under the sun done. And it's one of those things where when you start looking for things, you're going to find things.
Mm.
And are they the end of the world? And is it the be all and end all of your fertility? And a lot of the time, I think it creates a lot more stress than it probably needs to. So, what are some of the tests that you would recommend that, say, your fertility clinic isn't running as per the routine?
Yeah, so I would say and looking at antibodies as well, because, again, that's something that the medical profession don't really look at, because it doesn't make a difference to how they're going to treat you. But I guess from when you're kind of looking at it from a more holistic perspective, those antibodies are a sign that your immune system perhaps is, well, it's reactive, and there's lots of things you can do from a kind of dietary perspective. And I guess that's when they're cutting out things like gluten, you might come into play. But yeah, we're going to want to know those antibodies are there, because we can kind of support those to come down, I guess, support your immune system generally, and look at, okay, why is the immune system being triggered, and kind of look at that. But yeah, as you think you said, the functional testing can become quite overwhelming, I think, when things are cropping up and you're finding more and more things. And I think it's one of those things that is very nuanced, and it's really not black and white in terms of, okay, this thing is why you're not getting pregnant, or this thing means that you're never going to get pregnant, or but it's just a clue that we can kind of look at, and I guess address, and when we have kind of lots of those clues and we're kind of addressing them all, then the hope is that we're just kind of tipping the scales in our favour for things to kind of click into place. So the thyroid is definitely one of them. The gut. So lots of people have lots of really bad digestive issues, chronic IBS, chronic symptoms and things like that. And I think, if that's you and you are struggling with fertility, kind of looking at that, I think can be really helpful. And, the microbiomes in general. So kind of the vaginal microbiome is another area that is definitely worth looking into, particularly, if you are going through an IVF cycle, just to feel like, you are doing everything you can to make it go as smoothly, as it can. So yeah, there's certain microorganisms that can be found in the vaginal microbiome that can infect implantation and things like that. So yeah, looking at your digestive system, looking at vaginal microbiome, investigating the male as well in further details, and kind of really big one. I think that I would say is one of the big things that doesn't get looked at before kind of couples go into IVF, particularly with DNA fragmentation, which, if it is very high, then, IVF doesn't override that. So that's something that, I think all couples need to know before going through that. And if it is high, getting to the bottom of that before going through IVF, because again, because urology now isn't geared up to finding why this man's sperm isn't great, it's just, okay, let's go into ICSI ASAP. There's no tools. I think they say, oh, well, yeah, make a few dietary changes, take the supplements. But they're not necessarily, looking at it in as much detail as they should in terms of infections and varicocele and things like that, which, all of those things are going to impact your chances in IVF and need to kind of be looked at for sure. And nutrient levels as well, they can have a big impact on success rates, things like vitamin D, iron levels, B12. And I think also preparing for pregnancy and going into pregnancy, I think that's one thing that kind of gets a bit left out. I think there's a study that showed I think it's a third of women, might even be more, going into, I think it is a lot more actually, don't have the adequate nutrients to support pregnancy. So kind of going further than just trying to conceive, actually, we want to make sure that our bodies are in the best place to kind of carry a healthy pregnancy. So yeah, looking at nutrient levels is really important as well. And I guess they're the kind of the main things I look at. There's lots of other things like genetics as well, which can be really useful, particularly with things like recurrent loss or, unexplained infertility. So if you have anything funky going on with your folate or B12 levels, I would say kind of looking at your genetics can be useful to work out, if you need to, have different levels of certain nutrients or different types of the same nutrient, just to make sure that you're kind of supporting that area, because that's kind of that DNA synthesis is kind of how a baby is made and grown. So yeah, really important as well.
It is such a big topic. Gosh, we could talk about this stuff all day, but it is good. Just like a few things that are basic, really, when you think about it. And right, when you are going into a pregnancy, it is not just about getting the pregnancy test or the positive pregnancy test, is it? It's about growing a life and supporting that life and yourself in the process. So yes, very important things to consider. And yeah, like we said, not generally tested or thoroughly tested in a clinic. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. One of the things that I love hearing you speak about is little ways that we can help use not just nutrition, but other ways to work around our lifestyle to help regulate our nervous system. And obviously I do a lot of nervous system regulation work with my students, and all of it is, meditation and using the breath and all these awesome things. And there's many, many tools that we have. But I think it was the first time I'd heard someone speak about using nutrition to help you regulate your nervous system was when I heard you speak about it. So can you explain how we can do that?
Yeah. So, obviously our body is, well, not obviously, but, the way I kind of approach the body is that, it's an interconnected web. So all of our body systems are kind of working together. So, our nervous system is plugged into our hormones and kind of vice versa. It's a kind of axis. So it's kind of going back and forth. And hormonally, obviously, we know what we can eat can really kind of support our hormones, but that kind of feedback goes back into the nervous system as well. So they're kind of interlinked. So anything that we're doing to support our hormones is also can support our nervous system. So for example, our blood sugar, that can be a really key thing to kind of, and it can be quite transformative for a lot of people to kind of really help, I guess, dampen down things like anxiety and kind of stress levels. Obviously it's not, changing your diet is not a cure for anxiety. I'm not going to claim that, but, it can really help, I guess, build more resilience to stress and kind of support you with that. So, if we're not eating enough protein, for example, and we're eating kind of lots of sugary foods and kind of, our blood sugar is kind of just going up and down on a bit of a roller coaster, we're going to feel way more anxious. We're going to feel way more stressed, way more emotional, way more up and down. So, making sure we're having this, palm-sized piece of protein with all of our meals and with snacks as well. Not necessarily palm size, but like a little bit of protein when we have a snack. It just helps keep our blood sugar, nice and stable. So yeah, the fat, protein, carbs, and fiber, that's kind of what we want to be including in all of our meals, which really supports our kind of blood sugar balance. And, for a lot of people who haven't been doing that and are someone that, feels very on edge and very anxious, that can be a big turning point, I think, for a lot of people to kind of just feel a little bit more balanced. things like magnesium is really important for the nervous system. And, if you are someone that's, quite a type A person that's doing lots and, stressing lots and, firing lots and lots of neurotransmitters, magnesium is something that will kind of burn through very quickly. And B vitamins as well. So they're kind of, most of our neurotransmitters have a B vitamin that kind of is a component of those. So if you are taking a good quality kind of prenatal, you've kind of got those B vitamins, and you might want to look at magnesium as well. But, from a food perspective, dark chocolate is quite a nice, source of magnesium, which everyone's really pleased with because it's delicious. Our nuts and seeds, our dark leafy greens are all kind of really good magnesium rich foods, which you kind of want to be including. So I guess it's that, balancing your blood sugar and kind of, I guess, making sure you are eating a really nutrient dense diet, because if we are low on certain nutrients, that's going to impact our nervous system and impact our anxiety levels and stress levels. Looking at, iron, B12, all of the B vitamins, magnesium, things like that, and making sure that, you're not deficient in any of those, because that will really exacerbate stress and any kind of this, nervous system kind of issues.
Thank you. That is such a great way to look at it. And I'm just going back to something that you mentioned earlier about how you really love to work with couples. And, we talked about how important that is, of course. And I have many students, and I come across it a lot, that the woman is 100% on board, but their partner is not, their male partner is not. And it becomes really difficult within a relationship. Yeah. And, you think you're doing everything and they're not doing their piece, and it's hard. So without going obsessive and, always feeling like you have to be the nag or things just aren't the way that you want them to be, what are some of the most basic things that men can focus on?
Yeah. So I would say, alcohol is a very key and obvious one. And I think, it's often one that men kind of cling to a bit for dear life, don't they? When their partners, cutting out everything left, right, and centre. I'd say, that is, a really, really important one. And, again, they don't necessarily have to completely cut it out, but just really reducing it down to, 2 small drinks up to 2 times a week, kind of max, I would say. Getting them on a male fertility supplement, just, to kind of ticks a box, and hopefully they'll remember to take it. But yeah, kind of getting them on a supplement, can really help. And I think one kind of really, quite a simple thing to do, which can make a big difference, is like a little trail mix that I kind of recommend for my male clients. So, a few walnuts, or why is my mind gone completely blank? What's the nut I'm trying to think of?
The other one's pecans, is it?
No.
Almonds?
What? Oh, my mind's gone completely blank.
They're big in selenium. Is it zinc?
Yes.
The Brazil nuts.
Brazil nuts. Oh my goodness. Some Brazil nuts or walnuts. A little bit of dark chocolate, which is really good. Kind of got arginine and other, good nutrients in there. Some pumpkin seeds for some zinc. And some kind of organic goji berries as well for kind of vitamin C and things like that. So that is just quite a nice thing. Have it every day in a little pot, little snack. And that's really going to support sperm health. And, just having that every day, getting them to have a handful of berries, even that, is going to help. And just making sure they're not having hot baths or saunas and things like that. I think, even sperm is quite dynamic, like to changes. So generally, even tweaks, even small changes can make a big difference to sperm health. I would say, making sure they're not drinking a lot of alcohol, vaping, things like that, knocking on the head, because again, we know that actually vaping still has an impact on sperm health. Upping those berries, getting them on a good supplement, and having that kind of nuts and seeds trail mix. I say those are some kind of simple things that you can kind of add in that are gonna help. But it's the same as I mentioned at the beginning in terms of that Mediterranean diet, and all of the same things that support egg health also support sperm health as well.
Thank you. And I do find that the very vast majority of male partners are very much on board, especially when you're having trouble conceiving. But it is nice to know that some really basic, simple stuff can make a difference for those who are perhaps less on board. So thank you.
Yeah.
Something that obviously comes up a lot when you are working in this space is, you work with people for a long period of time, and almost inevitably they end up experiencing treatments that aren't successful, or they go through loss or recurrent losses. How do you help your clients get up again from those situations and sort of start again? I know that horrible feeling of, oh, I'm back to square one. How do you help them move through that?
Yeah. And I think, obviously, getting the baby scans and the positive pregnancy is, an amazing part of my job. But yeah, a part of it is that, disappointment and loss. And, you do have clients that, it doesn't always work out for, despite them doing all the things. And I think that's, really hard for, anyone to kind of, to navigate and sit with. So, I think, you know, kind of giving them time, I think at the beginning, just to actually, feel sad and feel the emotions and I guess just let, be in that without, I think you can be very easy and, and I kind of am guided by my clients. Some clients straight away are like, okay, what can I do? I need practical. I need to, know what the next steps are and have that. And some, aren't ready for that and need to go through the motions and feel, what they need to feel. So yeah, it really depends on the client, but I would say, one of the things I can find quite helpful, I think, on a fertility journey and can be quite powerful is looking at mothering yourself. I guess there's that, feeling you've kind of got all this energy that, you want to be a mum and, I guess turning some of that to yourself, and really nurturing and really kind of looking after yourself kind of through that disappointment and kind of pain can be really helpful. And that kind of self-compassion, I guess, and just really taking care of yourself. And then, I think really, I guess, supporting them to kind of take a bit of a break from trying to conceive. I think that's the one thing. I think it can be easy if you have had that disappointment. For some people, okay, they want to just try again straight away. And I think, if you have been through a miscarriage, it does take its toll on your body and, your nutrient stores and things like that. So I just always kind of encourage and support my clients to kind of just take a bit of a breather, to kind of just get themselves back in a stronger place, physically, emotionally, mentally. And I think if you have kind of had a loss, having lots of kind of warm, comforting foods can be really helpful. So kind of, soups and stews and broths and, kind of sweet, like turmeric kind of latte, those kind of things that are quite warming. And I guess, like it's that mothering energy. So all the things that you kind of do if you're kind of, supporting a child, I guess, in a way, you can kind of really, do that for yourself. Yeah. And then, there is no right or wrong, I guess, with this. It's kind of just leaning into what you need and what kind of feels right in that kind of time where you're kind of healing and kind of getting back up again. And, if that looks like having a piece of chocolate cake every day for you, that's the loving thing for you to do, then, that is. But if that looks, like, getting out and going to the gym, if that helps you, I can't guide someone on that. It's what, what feels loving for them, and everyone's really different, if that makes sense.
Totally. Thank you. Is there anything else or any other tips or tools that you want to leave people with if they're just looking to make their lives feel a bit easier and less stressful?
Any tips around nutrition or anything?
All of your favorite things for your clients who are trying to conceive.
Yeah, I would say, some kind of really simple things that can kind of feel really good and be, quite transformative. I would say one of the big things is not looking at your phone first thing in the morning. Yeah, phones are just, I think, the devil at the moment. It's getting worse and worse and worse. Not sleeping with your phone in your room. And if you can, just not looking at your phone for half an hour before you get up, and getting outside, even if it's just around the block, get some light, get a little bit of a, 5-minute walk, and then kind of come back and, get ready and look at your phone. But I think, even that little shift can feel quite transformative, for your nervous system and for your headspace and for everything else. So that one's a really good one. I would say making sure you're having a really good breakfast, really protein-rich breakfast. I prefer, all my clients want to do this, a savory breakfast. So having eggs with some veggies and some carbs, I think can be, one of the best ways to kind of start your day and start your hormones off at, at a real even keel to kind of support your blood sugar. And getting veggies in at breakfast is great to tick that off. And thirdly, I would say, it's that flexibility piece. So just making sure that you are nourishing yourself in a way that doesn't have to just look like eating your vegetables and cutting out the coffee. It's kind of, also leaving some space for that joy and flexibility and fun and freedom as well.
Such a good thing to leave people on, Emily. Thank you so, so much. If listeners want to find more about you and the work that you do, what is the best way to get in contact?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. So it's rootsandshoots_fertility. Also my website, which is rootsandshootsldm.com. Just reach out on Instagram or have a look at my website.
Fabulous. Thank you. And I will link all of those in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for your time, Emily, and the work that you do. And I look forward to connecting again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and listening to this whole episode. I love Emily's perspective on all of these things, and I hope you found some of her tips really helpful. Now, on the next episode of the podcast, we are talking about what to do when everyone around you is falling pregnant. They're having their second, their third babies, and you're feeling stuck and getting nowhere. We also talk about navigating relationships and friendships at this time and how you can really deal with those people around you who just don't get it. So until then, I am sending you all my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.